Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting me this debate around what I know is a subject I speak often on. For those who could understandably become slightly exasperated by my ongoing drive, I would beg patience. I will briefly outline why this subject is so important and why we must start getting this right now, and crucially, how we get it right. I'm not here on the last sort of session before recess simply to sort of whine away. I do not profess to be the brains behind the operation when it comes to the role of addressing charities in a sustainable future veterans care model. My thoughts are a coalescence of many individuals and teams who have served at the coalface of delivering programmes of care and transition to our servicemen and women, both civilian and serving. It is not about me and my personal experiences, although clearly I cannot disregard them. Further, I am not precious about these proposed reforms. I encourage others to come forward and challenge and contribute to this debate. But that said, since I published these reforms in early January, they have been scrutinised by many in the profession. It has become clear that these are a set of reforms that the service charity community and crucially the service charity users can really coalesce around. So I would ask the Minister and his department to bear my remarks in this context. Charities have for over a century now been the mainstay of the provision and offer to servicemen and women returning from operations. It was just a few of them to start with, born in the aftermath of the First World War, in response to the sheer numbers of veterans and service personnel returning from that conflict. Through the decades, these charities have slowly but surely expanded to provide more and more whole care wraparound package demands for our servicemen and women who find returning to these shores a struggle. I will say now, at the very outset of the debate, that we must stick to the truth about those to whom this sector is set up to benefit. The vast majority of veterans settle and transition from wartime operations, perhaps changed by their experiences, but able to adapt and cope. Veterans are not victims, they are not dangerous, they seek no advantage or favourable treatment, and particularly no sympathy. In fact, a veteran will usually be the last to complain about their treatment and the last to seek to blame. Against this burgeoning charitable provision in the last century, the state was happy to take a back seat, content to allow this sector to soak up the problem of veterans' care. In some ways, this was understandable. Intense conflict was not a regular occurrence. Veterans' care needs are complex and long-term, and I'm afraid the bold truth is that there are few votes in getting veterans' care right. But I would think it would be fair to say that this century has seen a marked change in the scale and complexity of veterans' care in the United Kingdom. In 2003, this House decided to go to war in Iraq. This was swiftly followed by a significant expansion of the British effort in Afghanistan to include the now notorious Helmand province. In Afghanistan, we walked into the most intense ground combat seen by the British Army since Korea in the 50s. The numbers of troops that these two conflicts required, combined with the increasing survivability of soldiers on the battlefield, saw an explosion in the demand for services of veterans' care charities. Against this scene, I decided to try and win a place in this House to be their voice, because I believe we can do it. I believe we can deliver better for our veterans. It is not us to allow our veterans to become embittered, desperate or discarded. It is not in keeping with the debt that this nation owes these individuals. It is not British. It is not the British Army's way of doing things. We look after our people, we do our duty by them as they have done their duty by us. And crucially, we don't just talk a good game on this, we actually make sure it happens. So I have made it my mission in this place to understand as much as possible about the system as it currently stands. I've spent hundreds of hours in this first year meeting and visiting veterans, service providers and armed forces communities. I wanted to layer this knowledge onto my personal experiences of having recently made the transition from military service, against having seen many friends attempt to find help and be unsuccessful, against having seen in some of my own men the dark battles they face daily in their minds. For the government of the day, veterans' care, like a lot of things, was not part of the plan for Iraq or Afghanistan. Set against an increasingly desperate narrative of shocking cases of care, and set against a complete vacuum of this type of care provided by those who had asked our servicemen and women to do their bidding, the great British public stepped up. Help for Heroes and others like it were born. They were born out of a gratitude that said simply, the boys deserve better than this. If the state won't do it, then we will. These service charities have been the saviours of many lives who have been fought for by their comrades to stay alive on the battlefield, remarkably preserved in Iraq and Afghanistan, but have found their hardest battles within the relative safety of the United Kingdom. I cannot speak highly enough of these groups for what they have done. They have stepped up and delivered that duty of care that every commander at any level in the UK military feels towards the men and women they command. It is one of life's deepest privileges to command men in war. For those of us who fought and bled with them, that these service charities carried on that duty on our behalf when they came home, we will remain forever in their debt.
Will my honourable friends give way?
Of course.
I want to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this very important debate, and I wonder if he would allow me, as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on eye health and visual impairment, to highlight the brilliant work of Blind Veterans UK, who empower visually impaired veterans to live independent lives following their selfless service.
So I thank you. I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and you know, I really mean what I say when these groups have really stepped up and delivered what was needed for these for our armed forces veterans, when really there were no other options, and it was that you know, very British way of coming together and dealing with that made some of us so proud.
On that note, would my honourable
Of course, of course.
I really thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really do congratulate my honourable friend on this impassioned speech you're giving, but also the research that you've done. But I too would like to say that we must remember the families of the veterans, and I would like to pay credit to Go Commando, the charity in my constituency of Taunton Deane, that does so much for veterans, but for the families left at home. And they've raised money to do such good work for 40 Commando and all the Marines and their families, to give them holidays, to give them days out, to give them children's centres and help and support.
Of course, yeah. Thank you very much for your intervention. And yeah, I mean, it comes back to what I said about these groups who really, you know, often out of a sense of duty or often out of identifying a gap in their local area, just step up and do it for no other reason than to deliver care to our servicemen and women. And we're very lucky to have that as a country. Over the years, matched by this gratitude in many of us, grew an increasing bewilderment with the MOD's reticence to genuinely commit to the care of our men and women when they return home. I say genuinely commit carefully. There have been efforts made. Of that there can be no doubt. But the truth is, in this matter, is that we cannot simply measure it by what we've put into it, but how that actually feels for those going through the system, readjusting to life after service, or finding a suitable quality of care for complex injuries suffered on the battlefield. But now is the time to do this. In 2014, the UK ended combat operations in Afghanistan. That ended over a decade of two very intense and very public conflicts that inspired the great British public to donate. Those days are now gone, and we will not see them return anytime soon, such as the global political appetite for large-scale interventions of that type. This end of public operations and subsequent awareness of this, conversely matched by a huge increase in demand on veteran services across the United Kingdom. In just the last year, Mr. Speaker, referrals to combat stress went up 28%. The Hidden Wounds programme run by Help for Heroes has seen 500 referrals from a standing start a year ago. Regrettably, there is little evidence of a government department attempting to gauge the true scale of the needs of the veteran, serving and military family community as a whole. Nor is there evidence that the government is trying to track progress against that need. How do we as a nation know if we are doing a good job in this area year on year or a bad one? There are no universal measures of lives rebuilt or lives yet to be rebuilt which accommodate the good work that is already being done by the MOD, the NHS, the DWP, charities or British businesses and volunteers. Without strategic and structured measures implemented in a timely manner, therefore, a lack of action now will ultimately cost the nation more in the future, both in terms of the healthcare we offer to our veterans and their families and the finance required to maintain a fundamentally unsustainable model.
My honourable friend give way.
Of course.
May I again congratulate my honourable friend on this very point, that he is highlighting a very important national resource that may indeed be going to waste. Indeed, today in this House we said goodbye to the principal doorkeeper, Milbert Talbot, who served in the Royal Navy and served this House with great distinction. And there are many, many other veterans who transition very capably. For those who need a little extra help, isn't this really an investment in the whole country and not just in veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I could not agree more on this point. And you know, I'm not going to stray from the lane of this debate, but across the public service, we have a very special thing in these individuals who commit themselves to public service, who sacrifice their their family lives for the nation. And if we don't look after them properly, that will eventually go, and we need to make sure we get that right.
I wonder if my honourable friend
would
allow.
I agree with absolutely everything my honourable friend has said, particularly his words about the Help the Heroes for charity. I had the privilege of being the president of the Royal British Legion in Leigh-on-Sea. Would he join me in congratulating the army of volunteers who do so much to raise money to make sure that we look after our retired service women and men?
Of course, and I thank my honourable friend very much for his intervention. And you know, I can't say this enough or highlight enough what these volunteers have done out of a sense of duty, no financial reward or selfish reward, but a sense of duty not only to the country but to our servicemen and women. And we have to look after that. And if we don't sort of cultivate it and protect it, I do fear that over the years it will die out. Yes, of course.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Before my honourable and gallant friend resumes his main narrative, may I thank him for the vigour that he brings to these issues on the Defence Select Committee and indeed to other issues that we examine as well. And may I just ask for his view on the sheer numbers of service charities and the difficulties of coordinating their efforts. I'm thinking of the huge variety from post-First World War ones like Veterans Aid in Victoria to very modern ones like the Adventurous Pilgrim Bandits in Hampshire, where special forces take grievously injured service personnel on adventure treks to the mountains and the rivers of Canada, for example. But how do you bring all this effort together when there are so many actors in the field?
I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention, and it would appear that I have planted that question, but I haven't, because I actually come on to address precisely this point in about 2 or 3 minutes' time. Of course, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before my honourable friend moves on, I felt it might be time just to mention perhaps that you may agree that local authorities must play a part in coordinating local charity work and supporting veteran care, so that we make sure that our councils work with the Armed Forces Covenants properly to produce real local tangible results.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I couldn't agree more that this is across both national and local government in delivering this. I think that we need to be very careful around veterans' care when it comes to local elected officials who may wish to, you know, there is nothing political about veterans. It is a national issue. It's something that I wrestle with in Plymouth. We need to make sure that we stick within the lane of delivering a service for them. And the local professional side of the council is very well placed to deliver that. Right, so the individuals, so summing up on how the situation lies, the individuals who are suffering most with the changing tides in this debate are the blokes. Too many are now falling short, too many are struggling to access care. Every weekend there is another case in the Sunday papers. Whilst national debate moves on to Europe, national security, the deficit and other very important issues, these soldiers' lives stand still, awaiting an intervention by somebody who cares. They are the lucky ones, their stories got in the paper, and they inevitably get helped by that knight in shining armour, the great British public. For every one of them, there are many that do not. For what is it really like to be 2 or 3 years out of the army, holding down a civilian job and providing for your family when you start hitting rougher waters, and the thoughts just won't leave you alone? Where do you go? To whom do you turn? Do you self-refer to a charity and hope for the best? How do you know that charity is providing care that works? How do you know they are professional? What happens if the course of treatment they provide does not work? Who is going to help you through the process? Who really cares? In the pre-Christmas report by the Ministry of Defence into the Armed Forces Covenant, wide reference was made to what is going into the arena of military support, and that is to be commended. But it fails to provide any meaningful statistical reference to the single most important measure of success, what our military community got out of it. This is the single biggest mindset that must be achieved, reconfiguring the services around the users. There are problems. Waiting times are simply too long. There are distinct regional variations in services available. There is a huge challenge to veterans navigating a complex set of unclear treatment pathways. There is a lack of regulation over the quality and efficacy of treatments being provided by some, while some of these are more unscrupulous outfits which still receive government finance. The truth is, our veterans today are using an array of treatments that vary wildly in effectiveness, professionalism, access points and delivery, and this is especially so with mental health care. I hope I've outlined why this is so important, so timely and tough for those of us who have been through these wars to let go of, for which I'm afraid I make no apology. So I want to add to this debate. I want to offer a solution to government that can get this right. I wanted this Prime Minister, who has always got this issue, to accept that getting this right in this Parliament is part of his legacy, and I know that he does. But chiefly I want the MOD to really understand the challenge that we face in getting this right and getting it right now, and I make that appeal to them again today. There will always be better times to reform. There will always be opportunities to duck difficult issues for a lack of a 100% solution. There will always be those who have lost focus on who is the centre of this service, the men and women to whom we owe so much. How do we fix it then? Whilst users should be able to choose what sort of service they wish, they should be provided with unbiased assistance and help to navigate their way through a highly complex array of services. We must be realistic in our reform. Currently, of these services, many are not evidence-based, and some appear to unhelpfully compete for business, and a few are even unsafe or unethical in their approach. If we are to produce a first-class service, which both the military service community and indeed the nation deserves, after committing and giving so much of their own money, wide-reaching but fair reform will be needed, which must be focused exclusively on the key principles of the following four streams: evidence-based treatment, a cultural shift of an aim of creating not good veterans but good citizens who have served, a service configured singularly around the service user, which will include service families, and clear and accessible care pathways. It's worth noting at this stage that a sustainable model of future veterans' care and support in this country cannot simply be modelled on how other nations have done it. We face a similar but subtler challenge in the UK, given our cultural and societal perceptions towards serving and retired military service personnel and their families. I'll repeat this key point. Veterans must be singularly and exclusively configured, veterans' care must be singularly and exclusively configured around the needs of the user, with ease of access and dedicated casework management, rather than simply signposting at its call. So what do these 4 points look like in perhaps a very brief but a little more detail? I think the future actually looks very similar to the present, but with key organisational, control and attitude changes. I don't think we are looking at huge demand or fiscal commitment to get this right. The government must step up and take command of the National Veterans Challenge. Ultimately, it is the nation's responsibility to care for our servicemen and women, and this must be realised. The government's role in all this, I feel, would be very clear. It would provide access to service records. It would ensure a uniform access process across all providers and providing and taking responsibility for a single point of contact, and I'll say more about that in one moment. The government needs to independently control impartial case management of individuals, focused entirely around the individuals and their specific needs, which must be met. They must commit to providing interoperable case management software and access or information of NHS and other care providers' data. But chiefly, the government must accept some sort of legal responsibility to ensure that care pathway. The actual delivery of services will remain with the current providers across the charitable and NHS sectors. So what sort of reform is needed specifically in the service charity sector? With our young men and women potentially at vulnerable stages in their lives, approaching almost anyone who can claim to provide a service, there can be no doubt that we need to address some sort of small r regulation of our service providers, something only the government can do. It is not good enough to ask a veteran to shop around and bounce from charity to charity without resolving his issues. Too much money has gone into the system already, too much time has been invested, and too many cases have been exposed to allow this to continue. I and all the others in the sector, I believe, are clear. Nobody can tell a charity what to do. That is not what these reforms are about. But it would be naive to suggest that the entire sector is optimised to deliver care for veterans at present, as is the nation's responsibility. With over 2,500 military charities and funds, to suggest there is not duplication, no waste, no bad practice and no financial misdemeanours is not realistic.
My honourable friend, give way.
Of course.
My honourable friend is speaking passionately and quite rightly about military charities, and I know I can speak today without fear of opposition on the fact that there are many charities that have tried to come together at various points. Indeed, when I was serving in the Ministry of Defence, working under General Richards, then Chief of the Defence Staff, efforts were made to bring it together. But there is, as you will understand, Mr. Speaker, opposition in many areas to bring streamlining when there are so many different charities who seek to fulfil a role in our society.
Absolutely, and you know, this is the nub of the challenge, really, when it comes to military charities and funds. And how do we go about those and actually get everyone pulling in the same direction? I do think, on that point, that some service providers need to take a look at whether or not they are exclusively configured around the user for whom they were originally set up to serve. And that is only a conversation that a robust, dedicated and strong leadership team can ascertain. But I do hold out hope that with a vision of single-minded delivery in an increasingly challenging environment, charities may be able to come together to identify their individual but equally special roles in the veterans' care pathway and work together better as part of a greater machine and a greater cause than just their own. But this requires leadership, and leadership from the government that will not happen unless we make a conscious move to do so. In my view, all groups which wish to provide a veterans service of any kind and raise money for anything related to veterans care, be it palliative or holistic, should be required by law to be part of an approved group, perhaps along the lines of Cobsio but with teeth. In order to gain access to this group, service providers must adhere to a basic set of agreed standards surrounding their suitability. These could include showing a clear practice of evidence-based treatment, outcomes, a complaint system, independent financial oversight by a board of trustees, and refusal to accept individual cases not through a single and agreed point of contact. I'm going to start wrapping up now because I do want to give the Minister of State a fair time to reply. And forgive me for sort of going on longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to take as many interventions as I could. Just to summarise, now is the time to get this right. The truth is, other allies are treating their veterans better than we are, and that cannot be right. We have this ever-closing window of opportunity. We owe it to this current warrior generation, like so many before us, who gave the best years of our lives willingly in service of the nation, hoping that we would not be disadvantaged for doing so. The Conservative government can deliver this, but current structures need reconfiguring. A Department for Veterans Affairs would be a huge step forward, but it must be given the cross-departmental authority required to deliver these changes. Veterans care is a multi-agency operation within government. At the very least, the Veterans Minister must have this cross-departmental authority. Finally, I would like to pay tribute to this Veterans Minister, who I work closely with in this area. He has achieved much already, and I'm sure will continue to throughout this Parliament. But the truth is, he has no cross-departmental veterans mandate or resource to empower him, or a clearly identified budget. In the United States last year, the Veterans Administration budget for 2015 was over $160 billion. This government has done more than any before it in this cause. That is unarguable. We've made real progress. But there is some way to go, there really is. This Prime Minister represents us with an opportunity to get this right for my generation. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this before the House today.
I call the Minister Mark Lancaster to reply to the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me start, of course, by congratulating my honourable friend for Plymouth Moor View on bringing this debate. And I think I should be honest from the start and say that unfortunately in the 6 minutes that I've got to reply to this debate, I will not unfortunately be able to respond to every point that's been raised. But I agree with my honourable friend. I think he's absolutely right that actually the time should have been spent for him to articulate the case and to allow other honourable friends to make their contributions. So perhaps we can pick up some of the detail at another time. But since arriving in the House, he's made it his mission to campaign on behalf of veterans, and he's already forged a strong reputation as a champion of ex-service personnel. A reputation cemented by the excellent report he presented to the Prime Minister earlier this year. Indeed, we should expect nothing less from a former officer of the Royal Regiment of Artillery. Today is also an opportunity to pay tribute to veterans themselves. This year, we mark a series of major anniversaries, a century on from Jutland and the Somme, and some 25 years on from the First Gulf War. Such momentous occasions remind us of the extraordinary service and sacrifice of our soldiers, sailors and airmen, those heroes who are willing to put their lives on the line to defend our nation. That in turn only underlines our responsibility to all our brave veterans, of which there are some 2.8 million in this country. We must ensure that their transition to civilian life is as smooth as possible. The majority of service personnel go on to enjoy a successful second career, or indeed a well-earned retirement, but sadly, as we have heard today, there are some who fall on hard times. Whilst the MOD takes its responsibility to address needs arising from service very seriously, charities fill a void. They are playing a vital role supporting wider welfare requirements, providing everything from housing to healthcare to helping wounded, injured and sick personnel back on the road to recovery. And they are preventing vulnerable individuals, some of whom leave service early, from falling through the cracks. With some 12,000 to 20,000 individuals leaving the UK Armed Forces every year, and the world becoming a much more dangerous place, as the terrible Brussels attacks this week reminds us, we will inevitably demand more from our people. That means the work of the voluntary sector will become even more important. But charities are also under serious pressure, not just from the scrutiny of their governance procedures, but from a decline in charitable giving. That's a direct consequence of the end of our enduring combat campaigns, which acted as a significant recruiting sergeant. Yet the government wouldn't ask our great voluntary sector to take on more responsibility without giving more power to its elbow. So we are helping out in three ways. The first is funding. In last week's budget, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, announced £45 million of banking fines to be allocated over the next 4 years to support military charities. It includes £500,000 for the CAIS Wales to fund their Change Step veteran services, helping veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and a range of psychosocial problems make positive changes to their lives. And there's also £2.7 million for the Royal British Legion Industries to help fund their 6 care homes, catering for ex-servicemen and women and their partners. The second is leadership. The MOD is providing critical support to the sector. Armed Forces charities, employees, many of whom give their time for free, do an incredible job. Yet in tough times, charities need to do more to pool effort, minimising duplication and making the most of their resources. There's plenty of scope in this respect. It's worth reminding the House that the military charity sector is as broad as it is complex. We're all familiar with household names such as the Royal British Legion, SAFRA and Help for Heroes. But according to the 2014 Director of Social Change, there are more than 2,200 registered military charities, such as Blind Veterans and Go Commando, rightly raised by my honourable friends. So we've been supporting organisations like COBSIO, an umbrella organisation for 250 charities in their critical cluster work. They're bringing more coherence to the sector by having members work together, as I saw for myself when I recently attended their housing cluster meeting. They're expanding the evidence base on the big issues affecting veterans at various stages of their lives, from better employment opportunities to residential care homes. We have recently given them almost £500,000 to intensify their efforts. Like my honourable friend, we believe that common standards will help focus charities' activities and ensure a greater consistency of service across the country. We know that some smaller charities exist purely to satisfy a niche requirement in some areas of the country, but for the more established charities, we encourage membership of COBSIO. The third is greater collaboration. My honourable friend and I agree that there's also a need for government to do more. The needs of veterans straddle Whitehall boundaries and national borders. They take in the MOD, the NHS, local authorities and our devolved administrations. At times the arrangement is unwieldy and unnecessarily bureaucratic. Yet whilst we agree on the ends, we do not necessarily agree on the means. Whilst my honourable friend believes we should have a ministry for veterans, on balance, and having considered this idea carefully, I do not believe that it's the best way forward. And perhaps primarily because it would duplicate what is there already. As Lord Ashcroft has said, a veterans agency would be cross-government, yet we already have cross-government support from the Department of Health, DWP and DCLG and other departments as well. We also already have the DBS Veterans UK, which, while focusing on pensions, compensation and welfare support, works in the same way. And above all, we are now using the Armed Forces Covenant, which is designed to stop members of the Armed Forces family facing disadvantage, as a mechanism to join the dots between services. The Covenant is backed up not only by £10 million annual fund, but a clear governance structure. We have a 3-star Covenant reference group which coordinates HMG delivery of the Covenant that is chaired by the Cabinet Office. It brings all the relevant government departments and devolved administrations together in a way in which a single agency or ministry could not. We have a ministerial committee in the Covenant chaired by the Minister for Government Policy, and each year the Defence Secretary ensures the MOD publishes an annual report to Parliament to communicate the delivery of our Covenant commitment. What I will say, Mr Speaker, in my closing seconds, is that I find it deeply heartening to have, as the last adjournment debate of the session, so many of my honourable colleagues here today, which I hope demonstrates the commitment that this Parliament has to our veterans.